Hey there, my name is Alexis and I'm going to show you how to make this refillable cat scratcher, and I'm going to be showing two different ways to build this. I'll primarily be showing it as how I would do it with my current tool set, but I'll also be showing alternatives so that a beginner can easily make this with a circular saw and power drill. And I'll even show how you can even get away with not using a circular saw or a miter saw or any type of saw that requires power. I'll be using a miter box and a hand saw, which are relatively cheap. They cost about $15 or so total. And in terms of size, it's about 24 inches long and 12 inches wide. And the material I used is red oak board, which is a little bit more on the pricier side. So I spent about $35 worth of wood just to make this. But you can easily make this with poplar and you'll be paying almost half the price. Although that price may vary depending on the size you want your cat scratcher to be. So the frame is made out of 1/2 inch thick oak board and they're about 1.5 inches wide. And to cut them to length, I use a miter saw, but if you don't have that, a circular saw works perfectly fine. You just need a straight edge to guide the cut. But if you don't happen to have a miter saw or a circular saw, you could make this using a miter box and a hand saw. Although I do at least recommend you have a power drill so you can affix the miter box into your tabletop surface when you make your cuts, because I attempted to do this without drilling it or having it affixed to anything, and you have to keep both the miter box steady and your wood piece steady at the same time, which can be difficult and will increase the likelihood of not having an accurate cut, which what happened to me. So by keeping it affixed to something, all you have to control is keeping your wood piece steady while you make your cut. As you can see here, the miter box opening is slightly wider than the thickness of the saw blade, so it's still possible to not have a perfectly straight cut, so keep that in mind. So as you can see here, I got a pretty straight cut down the width, and down the thickness it's pretty close to straight, but I wouldn't say it's perfectly straight, but it's pretty negligible, especially when you're cutting such thin material here. So if you're not comfortable or you're not confident in your hand cutting skills, you can always add a little bit more to your measurement, maybe a 32nd of an inch to a 16th of an inch longer, and then you could just sand it down with 80 grit sandpaper to remove the excess material after everything's been glued up. So for me, I decided to make mitered corners for this part of the build just because I've been experimenting with mitered corners recently and I like the look of it. So this is mostly for aesthetics and it's not 100% necessary. You can easily do the same way just using butt joinery, where the end of one piece of wood is joining against the side of the other piece of wood to make it perpendicular to each other. So I just decided to use this one over the other, but either method works in this case. And to hold my wood pieces together before I glue it up, I use painter's tape just to help with alignment, and it will help keep everything together once the glue is applied. And when it comes to applying wood glue, and especially when it involves end grain, like in this instance here, or with the other method of joinery, like using butt joints, you should add a thin coat of wood glue prior to adding your normal coat, because the way end grain works, it absorbs the wood glue at a very fast rate and causes the bond to not be as strong as it could be. So once you add your primer coat, you can wait about a minute, and then you could add your normal coat and then tape everything together with painter's tape or clamps if you happen to have clamps, but in this application painter's tape should be enough, and then use your speed square to make sure everything is square or close to square as possible. Then you repeat the same on the other three corners and then you'll have one of the frames made. And to check to see if your frame is square is by checking the diagonals, so checking each opposite corner, and if they're the same then they are square. If they're not, and if the glue hasn't cured yet, see if you can make a micro adjustment. If you can't, no biggie, just take that into account when you make your next frame for this build, which is the exact same thing you just made, but it goes on the inside of that frame you just built. And as you can see here, I did butt joints because it's going to be hidden, so I don't have to worry about aesthetics or anything like that. And the last component is the face frame, and I'm using 1/4 inch thick oak board this time. And again, I'll be using mitered cuts on the corners, but like I said earlier, you can also just do conventional butt joints and it'll work just the same and look just as fine. So all that's left is to glue the face frame. So before I continue, so here's your outside frame, your inside frame, and your face frames. I'm gluing the face frame with the inside frame. So the idea is you take everything out and only the inside frame and the face frame come out. So after building this, I started to think, is there a better way to approach this? Is there a better design? And after using it for a few months, I'm realizing instead of gluing the face frame to the inside frame, a better design would be to glue the face frame to the outside frame. So when you're installing the cardboard, it stays all within the inside frame, and then you just have to cover it up with the face frame and outside frame. Where in this case, you have to put the cardboard inserts on the inside frame, but you also have to lift the inside frame to put it into the outside frame. So without making a mess, the only way to do that for this version is to put everything upside down and install it that way. So the cleaner, better way of doing this is glue the face frame to the outside frame, and then the cardboard inserts would go on the inside frame. So to hold down the face frame while the glue cures, I used a couple sheets of plywood and just used that to weigh it down. And as an optional feature, I added a inside bracket. It's not structural or anything, but I added this in the event I don't have cardboard inserts that are long enough, so that I can actually add half length cardboard inserts and it'll be held down by that middle bracket. This is optional. If you have enough cardboard to do full length, then you can disregard this part. I just added this just because I might not have cardboard that's long enough all the time. And here you see how it works with it lifting and opening, and it fits pretty well. It's slightly loose, but that's fine. It doesn't have to be a perfectly tight fit. So I didn't have a perfect connection at one of the joints, so there's a bit of a gap. So to fill it in, I'm using sawdust from the same type of wood, and then I'm filling in that gap with wood glue. Then I just mix in some sawdust, then I wait a couple minutes before sanding it smooth with 120 grit sandpaper. And then once everything is fully cured, I come in with 220 grit sandpaper to smooth out the surfaces and remove any sharp corners, since you're going to have cats jumping around this potentially, so you don't want to have any accidents. Once the frames are sanded down and clean off any sawdust, I apply my stain of choice, which is golden oak, and I apply a few coats of water-based polyurethane to protect the frame itself from scratches. And while waiting for the stain to cure and in between the coats of poly, I spent my time cutting out cardboard inserts. I used a straight edge ruler and a utility knife, but you can use scissors and a straight piece of wood, whatever is available to you. And the last piece is a bottom piece to hold the cardboard inserts so that they don't fall out from the bottom. And I'm using something that's called hardboard, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's kind of like the same material that pegboard is made out of, but you can use anything really. You could use a very thin sheet of plywood, and because of how thin the material is, you could use your handsaw to cut it to size, so you don't need a circular saw in this case as well. To attach the bottom panel, I used nails. I definitely wouldn't recommend using screws because of how thin the wood material is. You do risk splitting the wood if you were to use screws. Alternatively, you could use wood glue, especially if using the thin plywood as your bottom panel. And here's that design flaw I was talking about with the cardboard inserts having to go inside the frame you have to pick up to install. So yeah, that's why I definitely recommend making it the other way around, so you don't have to hold it upside down and hope it doesn't fall out. Now all that's left is for them to actually use it. And it took some time for them to figure out what it's meant for. At first they were just sitting on it or laying on it, but you could lure them onto it by sprinkling some catnip on top, or you can also just do what I did and use a laser pointer to lure them on top, which worked pretty well. They got on top of it pretty easily, and then once they realized they can use it to scratch, they started using it pretty frequently. And this is how it looks after a few months of use. This is the underside because I've already flipped it once a few months ago, and they've used the other side pretty heavily, and I'm overdue for replacing it actually, but I'm happy they're actually using it and spending at least some of their scratching time on this rather than on the couch. So at least it's helping a little bit. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please consider giving it a like. That helps my channel out. It helps bring this video out to more people. And if you like this content, please consider subscribing. You can also check out my previous videos. Those may interest you. And yeah, I have some new projects coming very soon, so subscribe so you can see those when they come out. And thanks again for watching, and take care.